We have some questions from our viewers.
All right, please proceed.
Well, the number one question was, December 2019, you gave us a bit of a forecast into what 2020 was going to be like, and you said it was going to be nuts. And you gave us advice on how to navigate through. What would be your forecast for energies for 2021? Are things going to be more nuts, or are we going to see the great awakening and the shift happen this year?
As we have said, you are still going through the eye of the needle, probably to the end of 2023 or somewhere within that year before things really start to change. So the idea is to maintain the bubble of energy, the state of being that we have recently delivered to you, called high honesty, integrity, gratitude, and humility, that will carry you through while you're also, during this process, continuing to let go of those fear-based belief systems that may hold you back, that may not allow you to go through the passage of the eye of the needle as smoothly as you could. This is a transition time, and therefore take advantage of it to take the time, because once things really do start to accelerate toward more of the idea of awakening and open contact in and around or after 2023, then there won't necessarily be the same advantage of time that you have right now to take advantage of, to streamline yourself so that you can experience the changes that are going to happen in a more accelerated way after the eye of the needle passage in an easier, more effortless way. So take advantage of this time now to continue going through the process of letting go of those things that don't serve you.
And the second question is, the most popular question in this list of Ustream questions is asking for an energy reading of the rest of 2021. What beliefs are beneath that desire to know what is going to happen before it happens?
There can be both a positive and a negative aspect to this, the negative side being that you're not necessarily trusting the way things unfold. It's really more about focusing on your own state of being and knowing that if you focus on your own state of being, that it is where you prefer it to be, making the choices that you prefer that are in alignment with who you are, in your true self, your true essential self, then it won't really matter to you what it is that happens, because as we have said, it doesn't really matter what happens if you're in the proper state of being. You'll always be able to use it to your advantage. It'll only matter what you do with what happens, not about what happens in and of itself. Because even if something happens that you might objectively observe is negative, it won't affect you negatively if you remain in the state of being that is representative of your preference. So the idea is that you're becoming more sensitive on the positive side to recognizing what it is ahead of time that you're setting up that might be more highly probable to manifest. And because you're becoming more aware of what it is that might happen, the idea, nevertheless, is to not become fixated on needing to know what will happen. So it's a balancing act, as usual, between becoming more sensitive to the idea of what might manifest when you make certain different kinds of choices, and not necessarily needing to know exactly what will manifest, so that you can leave some leeway for your higher mind and synchronicity to bring you what you need in the form in which you truly need it that will serve you best, so that you don't become too fixated and insistent on what that form needs to actually look like. So again, a combination of beginning to become more sensitive about knowing what it is that's more likely to happen because of your state of being, and also not necessarily insisting that it has to happen exactly as you might imagine it at this moment.
Thank you.
Yes.
What is creating the phenomenon we're experiencing now on Earth, where it is so hard to discern what is true from what is false?
Well, the only reason that would be difficult is because most people are not necessarily exercising what you might typically refer to as common sense. The idea is there are things that can be presented in such an exaggerated way that you would, in a normal common sense situation, take a step back and ask yourself whether or not what you're being presented with has a high degree or a low degree of probability of being accurate. So the idea is to always maintain your balance, your center, and view things that are presented to you in a way that allows you to know what is really being presented in an extreme manner and what is closer to the idea of a centered, balanced point of view, and what is really highly probable or less likely to be probable. In other words, what is really more likely or less likely to be true in your language. The idea is to exercise that common sense by coming from a more balanced state, which gives you better ability, better discernment to tell the difference between what in a sense really serves you and what might be representative of something that is outside the parameters of the reality that you prefer.
And this is sort of a continuation where the person is saying, if I'm confused whether I should keep seeking and searching for truth through the internet about what's going on, and especially during this critical time in world events, I think I resonate with, but I'm not sure. And then sometimes I get so disturbed by some of the fake or manipulative information. I'm wondering, is my ego driving this? Should I just stop searching and getting information from the internet and just let everything go?
Well, again, as many of you know, the way that your internet works is that whatever it is you do focus on for even a little while will activate certain algorithms that will continue to present you with that kind of information, and therefore it can reinforce whatever it is you've already been searching for, whether it's positive or negative. So the idea is to, again, be aware of the fact that that happens. It doesn't mean you have to stop listening to any input, but be aware that things are being tailored to what it is you may have already started searching for, so that you can, again, take a little bit of a step back and really ask yourself, no matter what information you're presented with, how likely is this to be accurate? So the idea, again, is that, remember, you can only perceive what you're the vibration of. So every chance you get, step back, go into a neutral state, a balanced state, a central state, and then you can be more capable of discerning whatever it is you just heard or listened to or saw as to whether it fits the parameters of the vibrational state you're in as a more centered being. You'll be able to tell as you practice constantly going back into the centered state, no matter what it is you're listening to, as to whether what you just heard really fits that central balanced state or not.
And then this individual says that it asks, is it necessary to see dark forces like evil in order to ascend to higher consciousness? This person has delved into conspiracy theories because it just looks like it's there in his timeline. And I know there's a split, but what if my observation of negativity hinders my path of what I prefer? Do I pray for these dark forces to have the option to choose light? I don't want to get sucked into a bad timeline of being controlled because I'm fearful and I'm observing it.
As we have often said, just because you can observe it doesn't mean you're in that reality. And just because you can observe it doesn't mean that it affects you, because you're the one that decides what affects you with your belief system. The very idea that you're worried that you might, as you say, get sucked into it is part of the negative vibrational energy that a negative reality would want you to buy into. So the idea is, don't buy into the idea that an observation is an automatic entrainment. If you, again, stay balanced and centered with what you know is true for you, you will realize that as you expand your consciousness, you're not going to become less aware of the potential for negative choices. You'll become more aware of the potential for negative choices, but you'll also understand that it's nothing more than a potential. It doesn't affect you until you actually choose it. Now, if you feel like you're out of touch with your belief systems, that many of the fear-based belief systems within you are unconscious, and that those unconscious beliefs may in some way get you to choose those negative things without you knowing what you're doing, well, again, remember that if you're constantly checking in with yourself, then you will course correct as you go. The people that get caught up deeply in the idea of fear-based realities and negative conspiracy theories are usually the ones that don't bother to check in with themselves as to whether they're getting caught up in it. So as long as you're constantly going back to center and checking within yourself to say, does this really resonate with me? And this central position in this balanced point of view, does this really resonate with me or does it not? As long as you keep checking in, you will course correct. You will make decisions then that won't matter what it is you're seeing. You will know whether it fits you or not more clearly by coming from that balanced state and by constantly checking yourself to make sure that you are course correcting. Again, the people that simply fall, as you say, head over heels or hook, line, and sinker into things that are not necessarily in alignment with who they truly are, never really stop to bother and check themselves to see whether or not they're going too far in one direction or another. But everything contains positive and negative energy on every level. So as you expand, you'll become more aware of the negative as well as the positive, but you'll also become more aware that you can choose what you prefer without invalidating what you don't.
And just finally, expanding on that, this individual says, I'm seeing more and more control methods. Some I knew as a child, at least it was from my perspective. Does this mean I just have to heal within? If I see control mechanisms outside of me, do I have an issue with control inside me? And if so, how do I heal that? I've tried changing my beliefs, but I'm still seeing control mechanisms.
Then if you are changing your beliefs and still see other people creating control mechanisms, then why not just assume it's a neutral observation as opposed to falling into the worry that somehow it's going to affect you or going to be representative that you might still have negative fear-based beliefs within you. Again, you have the choice to always make sure you're clear within yourself, but just because you're clear within yourself, remember that you are in a time and place of transformation on your planet where just because you might be clearer doesn't mean you're going to immediately stop seeing other people making choices that are vibrationally incompatible with you. This is going to continue for a little while. Eventually, in the years down the road, you will generally no longer perceive things or people that are making choices that are not compatible with the reality that you've chosen. But that's not going to happen for a little while because you have to practice getting used to the idea in this transformational age of being capable of seeing things that are not your preference and learning to not react to them, learning not to take it personally, learning not to assume that there's something going on within you all the time. Again, in honesty, you always have the opportunity to check within yourself and say, well, is this something about my own belief system? Or is this simply my ability to neutrally observe that other people are choosing things that I don't prefer? Again, the more you practice being in the center and in balance, you'll have eventually the discernment to tell the difference as to whether it's your issue or their issue. And if you understand it's simply their issue, then you're doing nothing more than observing someone else. And by being a living example of being your true self, then you, yes, are giving them an opportunity to see, in looking at you, the possibility that they might be more capable of choosing the option to be more of themselves. Not that they have to, but the idea is the more you're centered within your own being and understand that your observations aren't immediately to be assumed to affect you in any way, shape, or form that you don't choose to be affected by, then you can become an example to give them, with your compassion, an opportunity in seeing you and maybe making choices that might be more positive for them, but you can't insist that they do so, and you can't assume that just because you can see them that there's something wrong going on within you.
Would you say, though, that it is the common thread of the individuals that feel very compelled by conspiracy theories is the idea of fear, right?
Yes, fear is common on your planet, but one thing I would suggest is that you stop referring to these ideas as a common thread, because that only reinforces the idea that you can't step outside of it.
Okay. And this question is, you told us that God is all there is, or is all that is, and that it is existence itself. Yeah. Could you explain how evil and darkness fit into this? Now, maybe you already answered this earlier.
Yeah, we have already addressed this, and we wouldn't, again, use the concept or the label you're calling evil. we focus on the idea that there is positive and negative energy, positive being integrative and expansive and connective, and going more in the alignment of flow with existence, because it is slightly more in the positive direction than negative, because there's always a balance point in the center that gives you the freedom to choose. And the freedom to choose is a positive thing. So in a sense, existence is bent slightly in the positive direction. The idea of evil may simply be an insistence on continuing to express and choose and act out of the idea of misalignment, of negative energy, which is segregative, disconnective, inexperience, and diminishing. So the idea is that a continued persistence or insistence on the idea of continuing to go out of alignment and take actions that are also designed to promote the idea of misalignment in that way. If you want to say that that's evil, well, all right, but that's really just a value judgment. Remember that the idea of evil is just live backwards or live backwards. So the idea, if you want to play a game with words, is to recognize that evil is simply not really living to your true potential. So the idea of negative and positive energy in a mechanical sense is a little bit more discerning about what it is a person is doing instead of just falling under the label of evil, because it's really that everyone is made of existence. Everyone is, in a sense, supported unconditionally with love. So the idea is that everyone is attempting to align with that love, but many people may not understand how to do so because they've never been taught how to do so. So even though they may be acting negatively, the basic intention of the soul is to align with all that is. They just may not be very good at it.
Right, because the question completed with, is evil part of God?
Everything is part of God. There's no such thing as anything that's not. But that's why we're saying it's not really about labeling it as evil, but understanding that within existence there is always positive and negative.
And so for, according to science, some people are born without empathy, so-called psychopaths. Others inflict pain because they've been traumatized themselves.
Yes.
How is this possible? How is this possible if we're all made out of love?
Well, again, you have the freedom to choose. If you weren't unconditionally loved, you wouldn't have the freedom to choose. So the idea is that choices are made either from the spirit level for certain thematic explorations or from within the experiences of physical reality that determine what kind of choices you will make. So remember, when you say you're all made out of love, well, yes, in a sense that's true, but being made out of love gives you the freedom to choose how you want to express that, either positively or negatively, because it can be done either way. That's what unconditional love means. It's unconditional.
And so when we're out of balance in some way, for example, feeling extreme physical pain or living in poverty or experiencing loss or devastation or total emptiness, it's almost impossible to find anything to be excited about in order to follow the formula when you're in that state. At those times, we keep matching the frequency we don't want, and what we don't want is what we keep getting back. How can we shift our frequency at those moments of total despair?
First and foremost, by understanding that it can be looked at as being there as a lesson that can allow you to experience something other than that. If you don't have the capacity or the learning or the teaching or the wherewithal to discover within yourself that everything that happens can be used to learn a lesson in a positive way, then yes, you may have created a reality where you don't even necessarily have the awareness that it can be used that way, and you can feel trapped. But nevertheless, the idea of even saying that it is simply too difficult to find your way out of it is what reinforces the difficulty in finding your way out of it. So first and foremost, no matter what your state of being, no matter how negative or hopeless it may seem, to understand that it is only the product of what you believe to be true, and to not heap upon yourself more difficulty by assuming that it is more difficult than it needs to be, by understanding that it is only the product of a belief, by understanding that anything can be used as a lesson in a positive way to allow you to experience something else, by being honest within yourself, by looking around the world and seeing examples of others who are doing things that you would also prefer to do, and knowing that you wouldn't be capable of seeing them at all if you weren't capable of it as well, looking at those things that are positive and knowing that's part of your reality too, and not just being mired down in the idea of what you're experiencing immediately and only within a very narrow set of parameters. If you're willing at all to expand your vision to see that you can be aware of other things other than what you're experiencing, then that should be your first clue that you can divest yourself of the experience that you're having if you understand the reason why you may have co-created it to begin with.
And then when one is in a time of being emotionally devastated, and since there is no such thing as time,
there is the experience
of time,
even though time itself is a creation and a side effect.
I think the concern was, if time's not real and you're in a state of devastation, does that mean that you'll be in that state of devastation forever? Because
no. Right. Okay. You won't experience it that way. There will always be some version of reality that experiences devastation. But remember, when you say forever, that's a temporal label. And in a sense, there is only here and now. So in a very real way, even though things exist and can't not exist, saying things last forever is an illusion. Because forever is an illusion. Because there is only here and now. So we understand that this can seem extremely paradoxical to beings that are focused in a space-time reality. But nevertheless, in a sense, you could say things always are, but nothing lasts forever. And we apologize if this seems confusing, but that's the way it is.
Well, when you talked about the film strip analogy and the idea that each frame is there, but it's frozen and it's activated by consciousness, right?
In a sense, yes, and therefore you get to choose the frames by choosing what you believe to be true. So while the frames are, in a sense, there forever, the frame you're experiencing isn't. It changes billions of times per second. Otherwise, you wouldn't be experiencing the idea of time. So in a sense, the experience of time is your first clue that you don't have to experience things forever, because by the fact that you're experiencing time at all means you're shifting billions of times a second, and you're never in the same state. You're never in the same reality, even though you may experience it that way by creating the illusion of continuity.
And in the structure of existence, change is the only constant, right?
Your relationship to the structure is what always changes. And in that sense, yes. Although obviously the structure is constant in its own way, that's not what determines your experience of it. Your perspective of it, your relationship to it, your belief about it is what changes your experience of the structure that never changes.
And when you say, are there some parts of our reality that cannot be changed by the individual because they're created by the collective and can't be overridden?
Yes, because you've agreed to play by certain rules. There may be a lot of leeway, a lot more leeway than many of you have been taught to believe is possible. And so you can certainly explore what is relevant for you to experience that might make it very different than the general consensus reality. But there's a lot of flexibility in the consensus, especially in this day and age of transformation. But there are certain things that you don't need to have changed, that aren't relevant for you to change, because if you change them, then you wouldn't be, in a sense, playing the same game at all. So while you have made the choice to play a certain game, or as we often say, walk down a certain hallway, and that hallway will remain because you are that hallway. This personality is that theme, is that destiny, because it's unique. there are many things you can do within that hallway. Walk, run, crawl, fly, happy, sad, look at all the doors, ignore them all. You have the freedom to explore the hallway with a lot of leeway, but you will explore the hallway because that's what you agreed to do as this personality experience. You are the hallway. And therefore, even though you change the expression of the personality, the unique perspective you are as an identity, as a reflection of all that is, that doesn't change. So when you say, this is how I'm going to experience my true identity with this personality structure to explore this theme in this game of Earth, in physical reality, that's what you're going to experience. But like the game of chess, even though you've agreed to play by the rules of chess so that you know you're playing chess and not checkers, or some other game with a different set of rules, there are still a lot of things you can do differently within playing the game of chess in terms of the kind of pieces you use, what they're made of, what your strategy is, so on and so forth. So a lot of flexibility, but you're going to play the game of chess because that's what you agreed to play.
And one of the key things when you're dealing with your theme is whether or not something's relevant, as you mentioned. So you can always fall back on, if something isn't manifesting, it may not be relevant.
At least not at that moment.
Right.
Because again, remember, there are two types of synchronicity. There's the synchronicity that brings you opportunities to act on that become obvious as part of your path. And there's the synchronicity that says, no, this is not part of your path, at least right now. And therefore that synchronicity actually prevents you from being able to move forward in a certain direction that isn't you. So the idea, that's why we always say, is make sure you're clear within yourself that you're not the one blocking yourself from going down a certain path. But if you're clear that you're not really doing anything or have a belief that you're holding on to that's stopping you, then you have to know that synchronicity itself is telling you this isn't your path right now. Go in another direction you're capable of acting on that represents your passion. And maybe you'll come back to this, but right now, synchronicity is guiding you flawlessly by both giving you an opportunity to act on something and also preventing you from acting on things that simply aren't you right now.
And lastly, along this topic, is electricity conscious?
Everything is made of consciousness. To ask if electricity is conscious in the way that you experience consciousness, well, no, of course not. But it is made of consciousness and expresses and experiences consciousness in a completely different way than you do.
As I know, electricity would be connected with the idea of light, correct?
Electromagnetic energy, yes.
Okay, so I think that's where the question was coming from, the idea of, since the light is so written in so many of the text as far as the importance of the light, is it actually consciousness?
Yes, everything is consciousness, because consciousness is simply the expression of existence being aware of itself. It's just a reflection. So the idea is that everything is made out of that same, energy, if you want to say the word energy, or consciousness, but everything experiences itself as consciousness in very different ways. I'll use the word in very alien ways, very foreign ways, ways that you don't experience it as a personality in physical reality. For example, a rock even experiences consciousness, but the way a rock is designed to be a rock, and the way you're designed by yourself to be a physical human, the rock experiences its consciousness by you being conscious of the rock. So it's using you as a reflection to be aware of itself, even though it's not aware of itself directly in the way that you are. It's using you and other aspects of nature to allow itself to be aware of itself, but only by using those other aspects can it be aware of itself in a similar way to the way you consider yourself to be self-aware. So it's a very different form of self-awareness. It's a very different expression of consciousness. So yes, it's conscious, but not in the way that you are.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
So we have lots of questions about spaceships and aliens and things you might be familiar with.
Maybe just a little bit, yes.
So this viewer is saying that, they've done certain protocols to be able to make ET contact, and
Yes.
that in doing that, they've been able to, experience a spaceship in the sky and
Yes.
become aware of it. And so once contact is made and there's that craft there, then what?
Well, what do you mean, then what? Keep going. Keep
What
using your imagination. Keep coming up with other ways to let extraterrestrial beings know that you are peaceful, that you are centered, that you are balanced, that your intentions are positive. Keep going. Use your imagination. Expand the protocols. Be more imaginative. Be more creative. Be more active with them. Come up with different ways of showing those things. Artistic ways, creative ways, whatever you wish to do. But keep going. It will expand, and over time, the extraterrestrials will understand all the different ways you are attempting to communicate this idea of peaceful interaction, loving interaction, creative interaction with them, with us, and eventually it will blend into more and more face-to-face, open kinds of contact.
And that sounds fun.
Yes, of course. Why wouldn't it be?
Another question is, can you tell us about Phobos monolith on the Mars moon? Was it put there? Who did it? What's its purpose? And does it have any relationship to any of the monoliths on our planet?
The idea of monolith on Phobos, one of Mars's moons, comes from the ancient civilization that used to abide there millions of years ago, as a sentinel, as a beacon for a variety of energetic and scientific purposes. It is to some degree energetically connected to certain things on Earth, such as certain kinds of ancient obelisks and pyramids and so on and so forth. There is an energetic connection. But the idea is that it is something from a long ago civilization. It still has to some degree some activity within it energetically, but not really according to its original uses, since that civilization is no longer upon Mars in the same way that it used to be.
Was there anything significant about the one that showed up? Was it in Arizona or Utah?
Well, the significance is mystery. The significance is a manifestation of the collective consciousness that now is becoming more open to the idea of exploring mystery, exploring portals, exploring places that might be connected to other dimensions and other realities, so that you become more aware that there is more mystery on your planet than you may think. Because many people on your planet think, oh, we've solved it all, we've seen it all, been there, done that. Well, no, you've barely scratched the surface. So the idea is that your collective consciousness will allow individuals to create certain things and manifestations that will be more mysterious, to start pulling you in the direction of the great mysteries, so that you can really explore both the inner realities as you explore the outer realities, and ask yourself questions that you have to go to a different level to answer.
And could you share with us how the stones used to build the ancient megaliths, some weighing hundreds of tons, were cut and lifted into place?
Well, a lot of vibrational resonance, sonic vibrations were used to cancel the idea that you call gravity, to relocate the locational variable in those objects. But even though they also had certain kinds of technologies long ago that could do some of these things, a lot of the stones weren't cut. They were simply formed in the sense of dissolving them or softening them and sort of treating them more like the idea of cement or clay. So they could be put into place, formed in place, and not necessarily always carried. Sometimes they were held aloft by vibrational resonance, and sometimes they were simply formed in place. Depends on how far back you go with the technology before it was lost, before it was forgotten.
So interesting. So can you tell us a little bit about the different types of grays that we're interacting with?
Well, as we have said, there is what we call the Maz-A, which you call the typical short gray. There are the taller grays, which we call Mazani, which is another hybridization level, another phase of hybridization. Now, remember that sometimes you're also dealing with gray beings and, of course, other beings that come from other parallel realities as well. So we understand that there can be a little bit of a confusing mix of things going on. They don't all blame, in a sense. They don't all come from the same reality necessarily. So you have to be a little bit discerning about what you're dealing with when you're dealing with the beings that you're referring to as the grays, because they're not necessarily all of a type from your reality, or their reality, or other realities may be involved.
One question that came up is whether or not there are factions of the grays that were actually experimented on and abducted, just like they're doing to us.
Yes, but that's another reality altogether.
So the grays that we're interacting with were not subjected. Okay.
Though they did have the same Anunnaki beginnings in their own reality, in terms of being human originally.
Right. So different individuals have experienced abductions, and this individual is saying that they have trouble reconciling their feelings of being violated. And can you talk about that conundrum? Because the hybrid program is such a wonderful idea, and yet the experience of contributing to it was emotionally difficult.
Yes. The reasons that it is challenging for many people is because your society wasn't allowed to know what was actually going on so that it could participate more consciously. So the idea is that since this information was suppressed, since you were not given the ability to prepare yourselves to understand what you had chosen to participate in as a species in your own evolution, as well as the evolution of the grays in creating hybrids such as ourselves, then many of those experiences were traumatic. So the idea now is to understand you can ask to continue to experience these things on your own terms by understanding that you did agree to participate in this, even though you may not remember it, and that it doesn't have to continue to be traumatic for you in any way, shape, or form, as long as you are asking for the ability to enter these things on your own terms, experience them on your own terms. By not being afraid of what's going on, you will not experience them traumatically. And it can also bring about some of the healing of what you did experience traumatically by understanding that they simply didn't necessarily have the wherewithal, the grays, being that they created themselves to be an emotionless hive mentality in order to succeed in the hybridization agenda. You can understand to some degree that they simply couldn't relate to what you were experiencing for quite a long time until there were enough hybrids to know what you were going through, and thus starting to temper those experiences in a much more conscious way, allowing people to be more conscious and participate on their own terms. But the idea of the trauma really comes from the fact that your own society never really allowed you to understand what was going on.
And for this other person that's to this day unable to sleep alone and still has the need to feel like there's somebody in the room when they sleep because they feel so uncomfortable when they sense the presence of other people.
Again, this is simply, what we have just said. It's the residual of having gone through the experience without knowledge, without understanding, without conscious participation. So yes, it's a form of what you might call post-traumatic stress syndrome, because you were not allowed to know what was really going on by your own people. So the idea now is that you can alleviate a lot of that in the way that we have just suggested, by knowing that there isn't really anything negative going on per se, by understanding that you did make a choice to participate in this as part of the evolution of your own people into the sixth hybrid race, part of Earth's natural evolutionary stepping stones, and by asking for more awareness on a conscious level on your own terms, so that you know you can and always have had the ability to participate more consciously and let go and forgive the idea of your own people preventing you from knowing this as you grew up in your reality.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
This is a little bit of historical ET information.
Yes.
A question on the topic of anti-Semitism.
Yes.
The idea that the Jewish people are perceived as a special people by others, expressed in a negative way in anti-Semitism. Does it come from the fact that they were in ancient times guided and protected by the Anunnaki, and that their religious ideas were, as a consequence, so different from the existing religions back there that they were perceived to be a small group of elitists trying to influence society?
All right, well, first and foremost, there is actually something in error about that historical recollection with regard to being so different from other people in the beginning in terms of their culture. They were perceived as different because of a more direct genetic connection to the ancient Anunnaki, which was important to preserve for the future of the hybridization agenda to allow Earth to experience its evolution in the way that would best serve it. So the idea is that there was a sensing of that genetic difference that was called out, and because of the negativity that existed on the planet at the time in seeing them as different in that way, a lot of times, again, because of the same reasons people persecute others today, because they're afraid to look within themselves and project that fear on other people when they see something different that reminds them of what it is they contain as well, but they're afraid to look at, then there is persecution. But the idea that their culture in the beginning was so different isn't actually true. The idea of monotheism is actually a very late arrival in the culture of the ancient Hebrew people. The original idea that was really quite prominent in the beginning was similar throughout many different cultures, and that is the recognition, and of course at the time, because of the way they express things, the worship of not only the male principle of the so-called monotheistic God, but also the female principle of the idea of feminine energy, the goddess energy. This was actually quite prevalent throughout the ancient cultures of the Hebrew people, as well as many others. The idea of the suppression of the feminine came along much later, when those who were fear-based wanted to exercise the idea of more control over the populace for their own purposes of maintaining their power. But in the beginning, the idea of the Hebrew people was very pantheistic. They actually worshipped many different gods, and especially the idea of the goddess energy of Yahweh and Asherah. These things existed for a long, long time before, somewhere in and about your 530s BC, as you say, was a particular push to eliminate the feminine principle to whatever degree they could and focus everything down to a monotheistic patriarchal God to maintain the church's control as it was growing in power. So first and foremost, please understand that the idea is that the so-called beginnings of the Hebrew people were not monotheistic. They recognized the male and female principle within creation. It only became monotheistic in the way that it is now because of a power struggle that formed much later on. Does that help?
Yes. These questions are specific to Essassani and the Essassani people.
Yes.
The idea that there is a prime facilitator, is this something you mentioned?
Yes. Again, it's part of the idea of an organizing body that allows for the amplification and magnification of the idea of synchronicity within a society, stabilization of a certain state of being within a society, to allow people a little bit more efficacy in having the discernment between the idea of what they do and don't prefer. So in that organizational body of service, which isn't exactly a government per se, there is what we would recognize as a prime facilitator that is the core of that particular focus of energy to allow for more ability to have that discernment and balance within the society.
Is that active as part of these channelings?
It's always involved to some degree, although the difference in degree depends on what is being done at any given moment. But of course, since it's a part of our society's collective equation of energy, then yes, the prime facilitator is always present to some degree.
So what kind of challenges do you as a people and your planet have?
Well, as a first contact specialist, obviously we have the challenge of our communications with different societies, as we are doing with your world right now. The challenge of presenting information in a way that is capable of being absorbed by those that choose to absorb it is an ongoing and very exciting process for us, because things are changing in a variety of ways all the time, and you are very different from our society. So we are always challenged to come up with more and more creative ways to express these concepts in a way that can potentially serve your society.
And for you personally, how do you allow your sculpting work to leak into your first contact work?
Well, one good example would be the idea of the creation of something we have mentioned before, which is the kind of conical tower that is very tall, made out of 3 strands of our crystalline nanotechnological material that is actually vibrationally representative of your ability to tap into the 3rd strand of DNA, which gives you more ability and more discernment to raise your vibration. So our sculpture, in that sense, in that context, is a very prime example of the vibrational energy we are delivering to you to allow you to tap into more of yourself.
And so will you eventually actually come to the planet?
I am in orbit around your planet, as I said, stationary above Sedona at this moment. But if you mean literally physically standing on the ground, yes.
And what will you do once you're here?
Well, we'll find out together, won't we? Obviously, I will be, in some sense, a representative of my society. And what that entails, we will see when it happens.
Do you have any idea when that would be?
As I said, the idea in general is that there will be others before us. We will be more toward the middle or the end of the window of open contact. So somewhere more after the 2033s or 2040s would be more likely, as the energy exists right now, for us in our society specifically to start making more physical appearances upon your planet, though others will be first.
Well, since you're quasi-physical,
yes,
how does that interact with our physical reality here?
Well, again, we have the ability to adjust our frequency to a certain point, and therefore we would appear to be mostly physical to you at the point when you arrive at being a little bit closer to us in frequency. Because we will be more similar in frequency, you'll be capable of perceiving us as solidly physical. At the same time, you will also be capable of perceiving us in our quasi-physical state as well. It will just depend upon what the moment requires.
And I suppose the ones that would be able to perceive you would be the ones that aren't going to go running screaming because their own shadow is emerging and scaring them to death.
At that point where we actually can manifest physically on your planet, obviously, of course, there would no longer be those particular attributes in the people that we come into physical contact with.
I see. So lastly,
yeah.
You've said that we are the masters of limitation. So we'd like to ask you, you are the masters of?
We are the masters of communing with the masters of limitation.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Tadeo. We all appreciate you so much and the wonderful information that you share, and I hope everybody had a good time today with our
interaction. And we'll continue to do so, because it is time for your meditation. So the idea, again, is, of course, it is our passion and our pleasure to interact with each and every one of you and all of you together, our deep appreciation for the gift you're giving us and allowing us to do so. And now, please continue to explore the conundrum we have delivered so that you may allow your brains and neural networks to realign and reposition in a way that will make you more conducive to the great mysteries of existence and bring you closer to the vibration of open contact in time. Enjoy now your meditation.